coming up in today's video. Follow along and learn about an ancient sacrificial altar and winter solstice ceremony. Having entered into the 21st solar term, major snow, midwinter was finally here, with its carpet of glistening snow crystals. Just days away from the winter solstice, I thought I'd look more deeply into an ancient solstice tradition and ceremonial space. There is an ancient Chinese custom of worshipping heaven at the winter solstice, which can be traced all the way back to the Han Dynasty, 202 BC to 220 AD, and was preserved all the way till the Ming and Qing dynasties, 1368 to 1911. In fact, many places that still exist today were constructed for these specific ceremonies, including the famous Temple of Heaven in Beijing. Although it's called a temple, it might actually be more accurate to call it an imperial sacrificial altar. At the core of Chinese theology since ancient times is the idea of heaven, an eternal force that regulates all of nature. In ancient China, the emperor was regarded as the son of heaven, and it was believed that this was bestowed directly from heaven. As such, he would serve as the mediator between heaven and earth on behalf of the Chinese Empire. With this position, he was expected to create and maintain order, to protect his people from all forms of disasters, and to govern in accordance with cosmic laws. Rites played a very important role in ancient Chinese culture, as they would aid in maintaining the cosmic order and align the forces of heaven, earth, and humanity. Auspicious rites were the most important. These included rites such as offerings to heaven, earth, and spirits, and were considered great affairs of the state, and so were generally performed solely by the Chinese emperor in his role as the Son of Heaven. The most important ceremony the emperor would need to undertake each year was the worship of heaven, which was held on the winter solstice. This ceremony had to be perfectly completed, as it was widely believed that even the tiniest of mistakes would be a bad omen for the whole country in the coming year. Three days before the winter solstice, the emperor, with all his retinue, would leave his royal residence and travel through Beijing to the Temple of Heaven in a beautiful yellow imperial covered sedan chair. It would have been an incredible sight, with elephants, horse chariots, banners and flags. However, being an extremely sacred procession, it was done in almost complete silence and reverence. On top of this, no ordinary Chinese were allowed to view it or the ceremony which followed. To make sure of this, commoners were ordered to close all doors and windows and to remain inside their homes. There would be a ritual and inspection of preparations on the emperor's arrival at the Temple of Heaven. He would then purify himself in preparation for the complex worship of heaven ceremony, inflaming himself in prayer, fasting and meditation for 3 days at the Palace of Abstinence. On the day of the winter solstice, the striking of the bell of supreme harmony at 4 a.m. in the morning would signify the beginning of the ceremony. Hearing this sound, the emperor would enter the grounds of the circular mound altar dressed in his ceremonial attire. The ritual to follow would be carefully choreographed into 9 parts, with music played in 9 chapters. Odd numbers were considered heavenly, and with 9 being the highest single-digit odd number, it represented eternity and imperial authority. 9 also has special significance in Chinese cosmology, for it is believed that there are 9 layers to heaven. The ritual would begin with the burning of many pine tree boughs, whose scented smoke would drive out evil and send prayers up to heaven. Then there would be singing, music, different offerings and sacrifices to heaven, every single step carefully choreographed with spiritual significance. 9s figure prominently throughout the ceremony, which is helped by the construction of the site, which, as I mentioned earlier, was specifically designed for the purpose of worshipping heaven. For example, you will notice that fences and steps in places are constructed in 9s or multiples of 9s. Literally every single step has been built and choreographed for this sacred ceremony. The Hall of Prayer, at 38 meters tall and 36 meters wide, is one of the world's largest medieval wooden structures. Though this in itself is very impressive, what makes it even more fascinating is the building's construction, which relies on neither nails nor cement for its structural integrity. Instead, a series of interlocking wooden beams, perfectly arranged to sustain the weight of the building's roof, were used. Inside the building, there are 4 inner pillars, which represent the 4 seasons, 12 middle pillars that represent the 12 months, and 12 outer pillars which represent the traditional 12 Chinese hours. In fact, true to its sacred purpose, the whole complex is specifically designed with symbolism and numerology to reflect the mystical cosmological laws believed to be central to the workings of the universe, as are so many of my favorite locations here in China, especially in the city of Nanjing, where I am currently located. It's all extremely fascinating, however, definitely too much for the scope of this one video. What I will say is that within the complex there is a whopping total of 92 ancient buildings with 600 rooms. I should have also mentioned that this is an incredibly large space, covering an area of 2.7 million square meters. That's right, 2.7 million square meters, making the Temple of Heaven actually bigger than the royal residence of the Emperor. It is the most complete existing imperial sacrificial building complex in China and the world's largest existing building complex for offering sacrifice to heaven. Now, this Temple of Heaven complex was built in 1420 by the Ming Emperor, Yongle Zhudi, when he moved the capital from Nanjing to Beijing. For those that don't know, Nanjing, the city where I'm located, was the capital of China before Beijing, and this Temple of Heaven complex I've just been talking about was actually built as a copy of the Temple of Heaven and Earth, which existed in Nanjing. Though it was originally a copy, the Temple of Heaven in Beijing did have changes made to it during its time, and so the one in Nanjing would have been a little different to the one we see in Beijing today. After the Ming and Qing dynasties, the Temple of Heaven in Nanjing, also known as the Great Sacrificial Altar, was gradually damaged by the vicissitudes of life, until it completely disappeared. Saying that, less than 30 years ago, remnants of this sacred place were in fact discovered. However, reports since then seem to show that these remnants have since disappeared. Today, as part of my Winter Solstice celebrations, I will be visiting the area to see if I can find anything there that indicates it was in fact the location of the Great Sacrificial Altar, and perhaps speak to some locals who may still remember when remnants were found, and if they could possibly point me in the location of where they were seen. The Great Sacrificial Altar was a large-scale ritual building site used by the state in the early Ming dynasty to worship the gods and earth. As mentioned earlier, it was the prototype for the Temple of Heaven in Beijing. The site originally mainly consisted of a circular mound building complex and a square mound building complex, which were known as Yuanqiu and Fengqiu. These were created at the beginning of the Ming dynasty. The Emperor Zhuge wanted to create a sacred ceremony that would last for all time. For this, he decided to adopt the system of worshipping heaven and earth with the use of Yuanqiu and Fengqiu that existed in the southern and northern suburbs at the time, and thus the Great Sacrificial Altar was born. Every winter solstice and every summer solstice, he would personally lead hundreds of officials to Yuanqiu and Fengqiu to offer sacrifices. However, no matter how pious he was, it would seem that the heavens were not pleased. There would often be a lot of rain and wind during sacrificial periods, and disasters became more frequent than at other times. With this, he began to worry. Why would the gods be dissatisfied, and what could he do to improve the situation? After careful consideration, he believed the problem lay in sacrifices to heaven and earth being in two separate locations, just like when serving parents but keeping them separate. He asked himself, is it filial piety if parents live in a separate place? Due to this contemplation, and some other reasons too, he decided to change the sacrifice of heaven and earth into a combined sacrifice. This project began in 1377 with the Heaven and Earth Sacrificial Altar being built on the site of the original Yuanqiu Circle Mound complex, and as for the Fengqiu, well, that was abandoned. Though we don't know the location of the original Fengqiu, we can get an idea of the layout of Nanjing's Great Sacrificial Altar, which was built atop the Yuanqiu through some ancient documents such as the Great Sacrificial Altar picture in the Hongwu capital map. On top of this, traces of the Great Sacrificial Altar's city walls and ruins are also depicted on old 20th century Republic of China maps, which give us a location for Nanjing's Heaven and Earth temple. After some calculation of the old map, the total area of the Nanjing Sacrificial Altar is seen to cover more than 1 million square meters. Though this is smaller than the existing Heaven and Earth temple in Beijing, it's still an incredibly large space. After pulling up a modern-day map on my computer, I managed to locate the area by finding the spot with the two rivers. And overlaying it with a couple of the maps I'd found, I decided upon some locations to investigate. I previously read that after Emperor Zhu Di moved the capital to Beijing, the Temple of Heaven in Nanjing became increasingly neglected. By the end of the Ming dynasty, the gate of the Temple of Heaven collapsed, and huge stone pillars and rocks fell to the ground, forming a ridge blocking the road, and so it was called Shimen Kan, among the people. There is still a place located here with this name, and so this is where I shall begin my adventure. I've finally arrived at Shimen Kan. Unfortunately, the whole area is currently all boarded off, as they are building a new metro line here. Never mind, let's move on to our next location. The first thing that struck me here was this very big sign for Tiantan Xinyu, New Heaven Altar Apartments. Although these are, of course, modern-day apartments, I found the very use of the characters Tiantan, Heaven Altar, to be very exciting. I have to say, just seeing the characters big and bold up there really warmed up my heart on this freezing day, and I began to feel a spark of that ancient winter solstice ceremony begin to grow inside of me. I headed off inside the complex and I saw this beautiful tree with mushrooms growing. I'm normally not one for this kind of thing, to be honest. I'm not a huge fan of mushrooms, especially the strange red ones that I often see in the woods around my home in England. But there's something about this one that's kind of grotesque in a nice way. Maybe it's because they're orange and look more like pumpkin or carrot flakes. Anyway, I also found many places with names such as Heaven Altar Village, New Heaven Village, and Paradise Village, all names which derive from the Great Sacrificial Altar. And to our next spot. Or not. Originally, I was hoping to enter onto the university campus built here, but it's off limits to outsiders. So I decided to call it a day and head back home. Arriving home, I thought it'd be better to check my next location by electronic map. I could tell that pretty much the whole area was sectioned off by a private residential area for family of army personnel. I thought there might be some outer areas with a little bit of land I could walk on, perhaps with some trees or perhaps gates I could look through to see inside. However, the search proved tougher than I thought it would be, as high walls seemed to surround the entire area. I did find a little marketplace on the outskirts of the land that seemed to have some trees nearby, but when I zoomed in on the location, I found there to be a public toilet which deters you from the wall area, and also a tall tower which seems possibly to be some sort of lookout station, perhaps even to check there aren't any drones flying around. I took another look around using the map. I did finally find a tiny triangular patch of land that I might be able to visit, and so decided to make my way there the next day. I took the bus to Little Paradise Station. Nearby, I also found the Heaven and Earth Gardens residential area, both names which derive from the Great Sacrificial Altar. It wasn't long before I found the little patch of land I was looking for, though it had a baby fence guarding the area. Looks like even this tiniest patch is off limits. Here I am, stood, perhaps, the closest I will ever be to the ancient sacrificial altar site, just steps away from the other side of the wall. Such sacred land, and yet it's almost never talked of, and though the names of many places here point to the sacrificial altar having been here, most of the people in the area haven't a clue what used to lie on this land and the magical rituals performed here. On my couple of trips to this area, I tried speaking to some of the locals. Most hadn't heard of the altar, and a couple of the elders I had tried to converse with were reluctant to speak to me when asked about the altar. It's all quite hush-hush, but nothing can stop me from standing here and admiring what little of the other side I can see from the top of the wall, and dreaming of what magnificence this place must have been. In the 16th century, Jesuit priest and missionary Matteo Ricci, on his third trip to Nanjing, actually visited the Great Sacrificial Altar. In Matteo Ricci's Notes on China, he records his impressions of this sacred space. It is truly royal in terms of scale and architectural grandeur. It is located in a section of the capital, in a jungle or pine forest, and is surrounded by walls. Here, we find that the sacrificial altar was surrounded by pine trees. Later, Beijing's Temple of Heaven was also designed in this way. If you remember earlier, I mentioned that an incense was created at the beginning of the Winter Solstice ceremony with the burning of pine trees. Apart from pines, cypress trees were also abundant on the ancient Great Sacrificial Altar site, and they also surround the Beijing Heaven and Altar Temple today, which was built as a copy. This painting, titled Riding in the Temple of Heaven by Chenzhuo in 1687, depicts the entrance of the Temple of Heaven from the Zhengyangmen Bridge. Here we see green pines and cypresses cover the archway, as well as the walls and gate of the Temple of Heaven. The Temple of Heaven, or Great Sacrificial Altar, is shown as a magnificent building, and on the flat and wide galloping road, 4 literati wearing Ming Dynasty costumes are galloping. It's a wonderful piece to study the original form of the Temple of Heaven architecture in the early Qing dynasty, though it isn't actually a picture showing the state of the altar at the time of creation, but rather the author's memory of a beautiful, beloved past. The Great Sacrificial Hall was the most important building of the Great Sacrificial Altar. It had many gold-decorated couplets, and there were 2 sacred marble thrones on the stone platform in the middle of the hall, which faced towards the south. When Italian missionary Matteo Ricci visited here during the Wanli period, he mentioned these thrones in his writings, explaining that the emperor would use one when he came to offer sacrifices, and the other would be left empty. the purpose being that it may be used only by the god who receives the emperor's sacrifice, if it wishes to sit there. It must have been an incredible sight, and a magnificent place to communicate with the gods. Even standing here now with the hustle and bustle of the crowd behind me waiting for their bus, and the cars noisily passing by, there is a great sense of calm and connection. All is very much still alive. All is very much remembered. Looking over the wall, I see the tops of tall cypress trees. Could these be trees of ancient? They look a little young, perhaps daughters of ancient then. I do wonder though, if hidden within the complex there are any physical trees still on the land that witnessed the Great Sacrificial Altar. Perhaps I'll never have the chance to truly walk through these sacred grounds. But for now, I feel truly blessed to be this close. And holding that thought in my heart, I returned home. After a bit more research on heaven worship, I found that a relic of the Great Sacrificial Altar had been found and moved to the White Horse Gardens located in this city. Though I don't have time to visit it this solstice, it would be lovely if I could see it at some point. Though I haven't seen this relic, I did see a quite similar one on my trip to Chaotian Palace last week. If we go back further in time, further back in the Ming Dynasty before Nanjing's Heaven and Earth Temple, we arrive at Nanjing Chaotian Palace. This is where the emperor would have held rituals to worship heaven, veneration of the gods of heaven and earth, to show imperial power and his supreme status. The first thing you'll see upon arriving at Chaotian Palace is the sight of children sliding down slopes at the entrance. The children are so creative in their sliding styles. We have the heads-on tummy serve, backwards tummy serve, the Superman side fly, the arm tummy plank, the arms up cutie serve. And it's not just the kids that get in on the fun, there are adults too. I mean, why not? Okay, enough sliding, it's time to head on in. So here we are at Chaotian Palace, the Palace of Heaven Veneration. Built over 600 years ago, it was a venue where royal nobles of the Ming Dynasty burned incense and prayed for blessings, and a place where civil and military officials practiced the etiquette of worshipping the emperor before festivals. Chaotian Palace entered its most glorious period of historical development during the Ming Dynasty. Since the Ming Emperor gave it its name in 1384, Chaotian Palace became a dojo exclusively for the royal family. During the Chonghua period, the imperial court carried out a large-scale reconstruction of the palace. After its completion, the great scholar Shang Lu wrote the stele of the imperial reconstruction of Chaotian Palace. This monument is nearly 6 meters high and is divided into 3 parts: the head, the body, and the base. The head of the stele is a relief sculpture of a cloud and dragon with fine carvings. Both sides of the stele are decorated with winding dragon patterns. The base of the monument is turtle-legged, with its head raised and eyes wide open. The inscription contains more than 1,000 words, recording the positioning, scale, and reconstruction of Chaotian Palace in the early Ming Dynasty, making it an important historical piece for studying the evolution, regulation and layout of the palace in the Ming dynasty. This reminds me of the stele found in the sacrificial altar. Though I have yet to see that one, I'm glad I was able to visit this sweet turtle. Next, I was to visit the very special gate of Great Achievement, which was known in ancient times as the Halberd Gate, as halberds and other ceremonial items were placed on both sides of the gate of its 3 gateways. On ceremonial days, the emperor would have walked the very steps I'm taking towards the central gate when offering sacrifice. This middle gate was exclusively for the emperor's use, whilst the left and right ones served as passageways for the princes and other royal members. Ordinary officials could only take the 2 doors further away. I spent the rest of the day enjoying the palace grounds. There's such a tranquil atmosphere here. It's quite a bit away from the centre of the city, so many like to come here for some peace. You'll always see a few artists out here painting the majestic scenery too, and girls in traditional Chinese costumes having their pictures taken whilst dreaming of life in ancient times. Within the Imperial Stele Pavilion, there is a stone stele engraved with poems and essays written by Emperor Qianlong during his 5 visits to this palace. It is very rare to see 5 imperial poems of Qianlong engraved on one stele, and so this made for a beautiful ending to my day here in this ceremonial space. Thank you for joining along with me on today's journey. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and remember to subscribe and comment for more content. And I will see you in my next video. Bye! The light reborn within the darkness of old, majestic solstice drew with dazzling light. My Yuletide evergreen, the